Hello, and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. This is the second of what will probably be 4 presentations on system engineering measurement. This is from a paper I presented in 2011 at the NCOSE Symposium. And in this presentation, I will talk about a strategy for correlating product and process measures as a model for systems engineering measurement. And I'll show you what I mean by that in the next few slides. I want to first talk about where I think we were at the time in measurement activity in terms of process definition and where we perhaps went in the wrong direction from a misunderstanding of what had been going on in, for example, manufacturing processes. Then I'll talk about some generic measurement categories that can be applied to systems engineering activity, and then some specific correlation or attempts at correlation of process and product measures, and attempt to apply that to several of the work product outputs in some of the technical processes in the system engineering handbook. And this presentation at the time, the handbook at the time was version 3.2. So some things are similar. Obviously, some things have changed since we're now at the 5th edition of the handbook. But you should be able to, if you can't exactly reuse the work product and the analysis of that, be able to make, by analogy, the correct determination. So this is what we propose to do in the presentation today. The written paper has the details of all the application to the outputs that we analyzed in the System Engineering Handbook. I will show that at the end of this lecture, what the specific appendix looked like in the written paper, so you can see what the various tables are for those technical processes. So measurement history, what did we misunderstand? Well, there was a transition from inspection in the manufacturing process to process measurement in the middle of the last century. And this was based on establishing a correlation between them. So down below, I have a model of a closed loop feedback control system, and a version of this is actually in the NCOSE measurement primer. And the point is that in the 19th century, outputs were inspected as regards their product quality, whether they satisfied all their requirements. And that was found to be problematic because you ended up building things that had defects introduced early on. So there was a move to go to process measures. So the advantage of going to process measures is that you can stop the processing when the defect is imposed and discovered. And this saves the cost of the work that you don't have to do on top of something that's not correct. Saves the cost of the inspection because now you can do sampling. And most importantly, it saves the cost of the rework because you have contained the defect without allowing it to propagate. The risk is that if you have a process measure that's uncorrelated to product quality, then you have essentially an open loop control system on the process, but not the product. So you're not making measurements of the output, and you're not necessarily tying any particular action based on the process measures back to process change, because you don't really know what the effect of the process measurement deficiency is on the output product quality. So in engineering, effectively what we attempted to do in the late 19th century, early 20th century, was establish process measures in engineering that were uncorrelated to work output. And this was under the guise of process definition and capability maturity model maturity improvements, but the focus tended to be on process measures rather than product quality measures. And one of the things we really didn't do was clearly identify what the work products were from all our activities. And having failed to do that, then we didn't really establish product quality measures. So to be able to substitute process measures for product output measures, we have to do the correlation, which means you have to do both measurement types for a while in order to be able to understand the relationship, how the process measure varies as a function of the product measure, so that at some point you can de-emphasize the product measure and use primarily the process measure. So that's the key, is to establish a correlation based on having data of both. If you only have process measures, you obviously have nothing to correlate. And if you only do product measures, then you're doing inspection, not getting all the benefit of what we've learned in manufacturing over the last 100 years. So as I said, this diagram, a version of it, is in the INCOSE measurement primer, the about 2010 version, I think, was the latest. So as an example, in process measures, each incremental process has an associated measure. So we do process 1, and then we make some sort of a measurement on it before we go on to process 2, and we do the same thing. And then at the end, we have a product, and we would want to measure certain things about it in the absence of process measures to know that the product satisfied all its requirements. So for example, if we were doing a spray-on conformal coating on electronic circuit boards to protect them from moisture and other things, then at some point we might have a process that says you have to open a valve to spray on the coating. And so we might, after much research and definition of the spray pattern and ensuring that it's uniform, once we've done all that hard work, then we might simply use the valve open time to give us an indication of how thick the conformal coating is and whether it's the right thickness. And that would correlate to a requirement on the electronic circuit board to have a conformal coating of a certain thickness. So having done the research and spent a lot of effort, we would hopefully be able to eventually correlate valve open time with the conformal coating thickness. And then we would only really need to measure the valve open time and not have to measure the conformal coating thickness on each circuit board as it comes off the line. And that would be very efficient and effective once we've established the correlation. So one of the diagrams I put into this paper is the sequence that I think is necessary for being able to develop process and product measures, which means you have to first identify the work product, and then establish the work product standards. What does a successful work product of any type look like? I mean, it's not just electronic circuit boards, it's anything that we do that has some output. Having done that, then we can define the work product measures to enable us to assess each work product with respect to the work product standard. And that's whether we're talking about plans or requirements or architecture or anything else. In parallel then, once we've defined the work product standard, we can also define a work product development process to reliably deliver a work product that satisfies the standard. And then having defined the work product process, we can define the process measures that let us know that at each stage of the process, we're actually achieving the goals that we have for whatever the work product is. And then we do the correlation at the end of that to ensure that the process measures correlate with the work product measures. And if we can do that successfully, then we can rely on the process measures more than the work product measures to give ourselves confidence that we are providing work products of requisite quality that satisfy the work product standard without relying solely on inspection at the end of the activity when we've completed the work product. So that's the concept. We defined several categories, generic measurement categories, and I'm indebted to Tim Olson of Lean Systems Initiative, a paper he did in 2008. Base measures for different categories: size, how many, cost, in terms of labor or money or other resources, effort, hours, schedule, and we use a small d in some of the work you'll see below, delivery, delay, duration, and then defects, which is the complement of quality, failure to meet the quality standard. And then we can apply this set of 5 elements on the work product measures. So size, cost, effort, schedule, and defects or quality. And then we want to be able to define similar measures that allow us to assess those generic categories along the way. So the focus of the rest of the paper is on what can we define in terms of correlation, what can we define in terms of work product measures that correlate with process measures so that we might be able to de-emphasize work product measures and rely on process measures and have confidence that the process measures will be a strong predictor, strongly correlated with the product measures. If we can't do the correlation, then we have to use the product measures to assess the work products. So some common derived measures: productivity, which is size over effort; defect density, defects over size; and earned value management measures effort and schedule compared with a plan. So the rest of the paper is a set of tables that are examined with respect to these 5 categories, with expected product measures, categories, process measures, what we think about the ability to correlate those two, and reference to any measures provided in the NCOSE SE leading indicators, and that would be version 2. I think it's also 2010. So in the area of size, total size at completion, process measures along the way would be size completed versus time or versus a plan, and there would be a strong correlation because they would be the same thing at the end. There weren't specific leading indicators for that. It depends on the specific product, but the concept is very clear and straightforward. The effort, so total effort at completion of the work, and that'd be measured by earned value management. And the process measure would be the effort expended versus time or the work accomplished. Again, that would be provided by earned value management, and there would be a strong correlation. The related SE leading indicator would be schedule and cost pressure. For cost, similarly, we would be relying on earned value management for the total cost at completion and the cost spent versus time versus the plan. There would again be a strong correlation, and the SE leading indicator is the same reference. One caveat, which I identified in the prior paper on performance-based earned value, is we need to not neglect the cost of any rework, so that if there is rework on anything, that cost should be borne by the work package that did the original work, not some new work package. That would disguise or hide the actual defect in the execution. So one just needs to be careful of any rework, how that cost is accounted. Schedule, Again, that would be handled well by earned value management. What's the completion date? And then we would measure incremental progress versus the plan as the process measure. And again, there would be a strong correlation. So these are looking pretty good until you get to the last one, which is defects or work product quality. If we were measuring incremental error rate or defects or quality measures along the way, then we would be able to see a correlation. But otherwise, in general, this might be a weak to moderate correlation quality if we weren't actually measuring the product quality of the end item along the way. So there is a leading indicator on defect and error trends, and the specifics depend on the kind of work product that you might have. So that's a general outline, and you could use this for examining any systems engineering work product or any work product to attempt to define what's the product measure, what are the process measures, and attempt to do the correlation. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to talk about specifics related to the work products from some of the technical processes in the SE handbook. So the first one in the version 3.2 was stakeholder requirements definition. So I identified several work products. That's not actually the first process. This is just the first one I examined. Concepts of production, etc., stakeholder requirements, measures of effectiveness, needs and data, validation criteria, requirements verification and traceability matrix, and stakeholder requirements traceability. So these are work products from this process. And in the tables in the paper, I go through each of these with respect to all the measurement categories. And you'll see a series of tables that look like this. So the first column is the common measurement category, the work product measures that one might apply, the process measures, what I think the correlation might be, and any reference to the NCOSI leading indicators. So for concepts of production, deployment, operations, support, and disposal, size would be page count or number of concepts, and then we can have a process, activity versus plan, number of stakeholders contacted, but the clear correlation would be with the number of concepts that one identified, making sure that those were actually accomplished. Effort, we've talked about this, earned value management is a good way to capture that for effort and cost. And then schedule would be again, earned value management would help us with the correlation. And we run up against this defects or quality measure, which is harder to do a process measure on. So the kinds of product measures you might examine might determine inconsistency with user needs or incompleteness. So incompleteness might be able to be captured because you had an expectation of a certain number. On the other hand, you don't know, having established a concept, whether it's actually complete itself. And the percentage of life cycle concepts, percentage of the life cycle that's actually covered by concepts. So you might have process measures with checklists that establish what's needed versus what's developed and whether you're covering all the different life cycle stages. And the correlation would be the missing concepts that are identified in both cases. So you could establish that for concepts just to make sure that they actually were instantiated, but the quality and completeness of any particular concept might be hard to establish a process correlation. Again, for stakeholder requirements process, one of the key outputs would be stakeholder requirements. And for the rest of the tables, since the intermediate categories of effort and cost and schedule are all covered by earned value management. The rest of the tables only look at size and defects as being perhaps unique to the specific work product. So we've gone from 5 categories to 2 categories. In general, you'll see that the size product measures can easily correlate with the process measures, because the process measures are just how many do you have versus time. And as long as you have an incremental plan, you can easily measure your process and get a correlation to your expected total outcome. So size is not the big challenge. The big challenge is the quality measurement. How many defects, for example, measuring the quality of requirements or the completeness of the requirements versus some standard. For example, coverage of the requirements versus a number of interfaces and the operations or life cycle needs. These are harder things to measure. We've published some things about how to measure quality of requirements, and you can see that in the videos that are on the YouTube channel. Also, requirements completeness, how that is measured. So if you have those established, then you would be able to see that you've completed the requirements. The process measures associated with the quality of requirements are a lot more difficult. So that would be a challenge in terms of correlation, because it's easier to measure the number of requirements you've completed, but it's harder to measure the process that ensures that the requirements you complete are actually quality requirements or a complete set of requirements with respect to all of the needs and the interfaces. So the number of requirements could be a strong correlation, but the quality of requirements would be more difficult. You might make a notional comparison based on effort, but that really wouldn't tell you necessarily very much about the work product output itself. So the general trend that you will see in the tables that follow, that are in the appendix, is that defects are much more difficult to correlate process measures versus work product measures. So the several process areas we examined were stakeholder requirements definition, requirements analysis, architectural design, implementation, integration, and verification. And again, these are from version 3.2 of the NCOSI SE handbook. So let me quickly go through several more of these tables so you can see what's in the appendix to the written paper. That is actually in the Wiley and NCOSI publications library. So this is the appendix to the written paper for this paper from 2011. So I have here listed all of the work products for the selected processes. So this one is stakeholder requirements definition, measures of effectiveness needs and data, requirements verification and traceability matrix. And I have notes about work product measures that could be established and possible process measures, and my assessment of what the correlation is. And green indicates probably a strong correlation. So you could use the process measure in lieu of a product measure. And the related NCOSI SE leading indicators reference is indicated here. So for these that are established on this page, outputs from the stakeholder requirements definition process, pretty good correlation, I expect. Then we get into things like system functions and functional interfaces. And my assessment is the correlation is not going to be so strong, and so you would have difficulty establishing a process measure that would reliably predict the work product output measure result. So whenever there's a yellow box, that suggests you probably want to focus on establishing clear work product measures until you have a very clear process that allows you to correlate process measures versus work product output and it may be that that's just too difficult. So system functions, system functional interfaces are going to be a challenge. Specification tree, correlation of the quality of the specification tree versus some process, that's going to be harder to establish. So that's the area of the stakeholder requirements definition. For architectural design process, again, size is generally easy to correlate, process versus work product. Defects are, again, harder to establish a correlation. For example, quality of architectural views versus the standard, or fitness of the architectural views, or completeness. These are harder to establish. I will talk about architecture measures in the fourth lecture on these measurement presentations, so stay tuned. I'll have that available in a few weeks. But system architecture quality is much more difficult to assess other than with respect to an architecture framework set of standard views. That doesn't necessarily tell you about the quality of the architecture itself, just the degree to which it conforms to some architecture framework standard. Interface requirements, and I loathe that label, as I've discussed before in other sections, but that was one of the work products for this this process activity in the INCO CSE handbook. So quality of interface definition, completeness of the interfaces might be correlated because you can count the number of interfaces defined versus time or versus a plan, but the quality of the interface definition is a little more difficult to assess. System element descriptions, similarly, size in terms of number of elements and so forth, relatively straightforward, but quality of the system element descriptions versus a standard, and how would you correlate that to process? Much more difficult, other than the completion percentage, for example. Excuse me. In the verification process, which is section 6, and I think this is the last of the tables I put in the appendix, some outputs, verification strategy, and we can measure that, the size of that, but again, measuring the quality of that is much more difficult versus process measure. Verified system. So if we successfully executed procedures and if we successfully verified system elements, we can assess the size. Defects is more straightforward this time because we, at the end or along the way, we know which verification requirements are passing and which ones are failing as we execute each verification activity with respect to individual verification requirements. Quality of the verification report could be measured by quality with respect to standard, but the process measurement might be difficult to establish other than how long does it take to get approval. Some elongated approval time might indicate that there are issues with that work product. So these are example work products. I actually have an Excel spreadsheet, and if you're interested in that, I can share that with you at some point. You can get in touch with me, but it goes through each of the work product technical process areas that I examined. But at this point, you should be able to see what the common threads are, and by analogy, be able to do your own assessment. So in summary, we used 5 generic categories of measures to provide a consistent approach for evaluating work product and process measures. Size, schedule, effort, and so forth. And then the most difficult one to do a correlation for was the product quality or defects. Most of the other categories provided a strong correlation because we're primarily relying on earned value management with respect to 3 of the 5 areas. So that's useful in establishing the product and process measures in those generic categories. The defect category does not provide very many product and process measures that correlate for many of the work products. And measuring the quality of the intermediate work products would be a necessary step rather than just simply measuring the end work product. So that would be the in-process measure that would have to be established along the way. Effort measures might be a surrogate or leading indicator, but again, just the fact that you spent time doing something doesn't mean that, or the fact that you spent more time doing something doesn't mean you get a higher quality product out of it. And in general, unless you've correlated product measures with the process measures, then we can't eliminate the need for product measures. The hated inspection at the end is still necessary until we have such a strong correlation that we can rely solely on the process measures. So thank you for your attention to the video today, and I look forward to seeing you at our next presentation.